this early hour in the morning, but as Dr. Haldane said, I'm sure there'll be people streaming in as we go. Yes, this is a more challenging topic. It's a difficult subject to address, but it's a very important one. Our aim today is to inform you of significant current event in Japanese society um, on the issue of sole custody. Until last week, Japan was the only G7 country that didn't have a sole custody policy. When we initially started the planning for this, we didn't anticipate that it would be quite so timely and topical, but it really is just last week that the uh, a new the opportunity, the possibility for joint custody was introduced. It doesn't take effect though for another 2 years until 2026. What we'd like to do today is explore from a legal, sociological, psychological perspective um, the ethics and care of sole custody policy. We'd like to be able to explore what are some challenges in these policies, and so that we might arrive at some policy recommendations. The format that we're going to do today is each panelist will make a short opening statement. We have 4 panelists today. 2 are here in person, and we have 2 joining us online. After each panelist has made their opening statement, I'll bring together the points and issues addressed for further discussion and questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor to allow you to participate and join in with the Q&A. So let me introduce our first panelist, Professor Rokuro Tabuchi. He's a professor in the Faculty of Human Sciences at Sophia University here in Tokyo. He's taught sociology there since 2007. He's a part of the Island Sustainability Institute that's purpose is to harness transdisciplinary expertise of various partners. He also was a key member of the international research project on family patterns and family change in East Asia in the 2000s. He was a principal investigator as well of the 2018 National Family Research of Japan, conducted by the National Family Research Committee of the Japan Society of Family Sociology. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rokuro Tabuchi.
It's done. Okay. Get clicker.
That's my job.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My statement is very brief. I'm talking from a sociological standpoint on the topic of joint custody in Japan. And as Professor Black explained, for more than half a century, sole custody has been practiced in Japan, with the mother typically means more than 80% having custody of the children after divorce. And recent findings based on sociological perspectives suggest that the well-being of children after divorce can be promoted if the joint custody facilitates visitation with the non-resident parent and child support payments. For example, if the non-resident parent frequently visits the children, it might enhance the well-being of children. So my argument is that for the introduction of joint custody to effectively enhance children's well-being, urgent reform of the divorce system is necessary to ensure that parents can maintain cooperative co-parenting. Co-parenting means shared parenting post-divorce. thereby safeguarding the best interests of the child. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Our next panelist here in the room with us is Timothy Langley. He has over 40 years of experience in public affairs in Japan and is the founder and driving force behind Langley Esquire. He leads the firm's government and corporate outreach, and he holds law degrees from Georgetown and University of Denver in the United States, as well as from Tohoku University here in Japan. He has a unique perspective gained from decades working in and alongside with the Japanese government. Mr. Langley was the first foreign national to work in the National Diet, serving as a policy aide to former Foreign Minister Nakayama Taro. He also has been involved as general counsel and director of public affairs for Apple Computer and for General Motors Asia Pacific. So please join me in welcoming Timothy Langley.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haldane and Dr. Black. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this conference. As you were told, this is a complex, very important issue. The Diet, the Parliament of Japan, just passed the revision to the law to account for joint custody in the event of a divorce with children. And I have been a practicing lawyer in Japan for more than 30 years, since I worked inside the parliament as a secretary to a member of the Diet. I also have a pretty deep experience in how policy is made, how it goes through the various committees and becomes eventually law. And I don't have too much hope for the new law, which is allowing for joint custody. And the reason for that is because the Japanese really don't want to deviate too much from what is traditionally and spiritually something that they believe in. And as was alluded to earlier, of the G7 countries, and probably maybe even the G20, Japan is the only country that has up until 2 weeks ago, sole custody regime. And as a practitioner, so I'm not a bengoshi. I don't try to go to court to solve these problems. People typically come to me, and almost the extent of my experience in this issue is somebody comes to me and they say, my wife disappeared and my kids are gone and I don't know what to do and I need help. And I've been involved in probably more than 100 of these issues, and almost universally I have been unsuccessful because it is the law, the court systems, the police, the family services are all geared towards allowing for one parent to completely control the upbringing of the children to the exclusion of the other parent. And for people who are Japanese, who grow up in Japan, who read novels and are educated in the program, and who have friends who were products of divorce, they kind of know that this happens. It's the foreigners who are disproportionately affected by that. I'm married to a Japanese, and I know a lot of other people are married to Japanese nationals. And when you get married, you would never, ever consider that this person that you fell in love with would ever distance you from whatever children you had. It's one of those things, like in Japan, that is so contrary to what it is that you believe, how this country and how this society works. And I think it is clear that the only reason why the Japanese government has changed from a sole custody to a joint custody is because of foreign pressure and their pressure to sign on to the Hague Convention, which deals with equal access to children. And so when foreigners are in Japan, living in Japan, and to have that kind of a disproportionate impact on them outside of whatever they had considered. I mean, I was something of a Japan expert before I came here. I never knew anything about this. I didn't know child kidnapping was a thing, a legitimate thing, until after I'd been practicing law for many years and somebody told me about it, and I thought they had a snake on their head or something. It was just so out of that the Japanese, either male or the female, the mother or the father, would actually do something like that. The title of this panel is Ethics and Care. And when you think about ethics and the right thing to do and the just thing to do, it is not taking and restricting the product of the union of two people exclusively to one person. So there are a lot of emotions involved in this, and I hope I don't go on too long and take time away from my fellow panelists. But of the number of marriages in Japan, it's pretty astounding when you think of the number of total marriages in Japan in 2021. There were about 673,000 marriages. Of those, about 3.7% were a Japanese national marrying a foreign national. It turns out that, contrary to what you probably think, I don't know, but that the majority of those marriages are Japanese men marrying foreign women, not foreign men marrying Japanese women. It's somewhat lopsided in my mind. I would have thought that the Japanese women traveling or being here and interacting with the foreign community would be attractive as a lifetime partner, as a spouse. But it turns out it's quite different. In fact, there are 4 times more Japanese males who are married to foreigners than Japanese females who are married to foreigners. And that has a big impact. It has a big impact on this potential for child kidnapping as well. And like I said before, it's mostly the foreigners who are negatively impacted by that, because when a Japanese person becomes confronted with a marriage that is untenable, they don't like each other, they don't sleep with each other, they have fights all the time. The party who moves first, who violates this oath between the two people, is the winner, is the person who receives custody of the children in most cases. There's some variation there, but in most cases, the person who violates this oath between two people is the winner. That's the person that gets custody of the kids, and the other party is the one who, in most instances, needs to pay child support and beg for visitation rights, which are very, very stingily given. And even in under court order, the time and the day that you're supposed to visit with your children, suddenly they have a piano lesson or they have a cough, and it just doesn't work out. And it strikes you as very, very different from what you conceive of life in Japan and Japanese people in this kind of context of how interpersonal relations occur. Anyway, I've been here for 40 years, and I love this country, and I'm intricately engaged in how policy is made and how law is applied. But it's just a very interesting aspect of Japanese law and policy. I'm really hopeful that because now they have a joint custody law, more or fewer people will be a victim of a parental kidnapping. It still happens, and it will still happen moving into the future. But hopefully, we'll see some progress on that. And I hope some of the heat and the light from this panel discussion explores and kind of reveals that to you. Once again, thank you very much for having me on the panel.
Ricky Langley, thank you very much. Okay, next, joining us online, first, we have Dr. Ayako Harada, who is a professor of sociology of law at Nagoya University Graduate School of Law. Throughout her academic career, she's been engaged in research on children and family law issues involving child abuse and neglect, child custody and adoption. And she's published extensively on these topics. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ayako Harada.
Thank you for introducing myself. My speech, the title of my speech is Custody Law Reform and What is to Do Next. So we have had the long-term single custody only policy, Tandok Shinken Seido, for post-divorce families in Japan since 1947, post-war family law reform. And around 1960s, tendency changed from father's custody to mother's custody. And nowadays, most of the time, mother take the custody after divorce, maybe 90% of the case. But after 1990s, new social and political attention to children who experience divorce occurred in Japanese society. And one of the aspects is the child poverty in single parent, namely single mother household. And the poverty, one of the reasons for the poverty is considered to be the lack of child support payment. And another aspect of the new attention is the lack of visitation or meaningful relationship between the child and the non-custodial parent. So we have been talking about the new law, and only last week we reversed the civil code, and now after in 2 years, the couple is going to have another option of shared custody on top of the single custody for when they get divorced. And having more custody option is obviously a good move, but it does not in itself solve post-divorce parenting issues or conflicts in real day-to-day lives. Developing effective legal and social infrastructures is the key to the successful reform to better serve the interest of the children. One of the area we had to look at is educative intervention for parents in the process of divorce agreement, because maybe the Western style co-parenting is very new to Japanese society. So we had to learn how to do that. So maybe we had to change the cultural attitude toward what we had to do for the sake of the children after divorce. And another aspect is strengthening legal procedure, including domestic violence and child abuse assessment. And because we have a very strong discussion against that joint custody from the people who have concerns about the domestic violence and child abuse, because sole custody policy indirectly helps those people who have suffered from violence, because they can cut the relationship by having the sole custody after divorce. So we have strong concern about the domestic violence issues in society. So we have to deal with that concern in the process of divorce. And healing and respecting children's voices are another aspect which I really focus on now, because we have been really ignoring the children's voices, children's aspect, viewpoints in the process of divorce, especially in the divorce by agreement process. So we had to improve in this aspect as well. And the social aspect is also important. Not just judicial system, but also social system should be improved to help children and the families after divorce, including the visitation support services. We have much agency in society to help the visitation who have struggling, for the people who have struggling in contacting with each other by themselves. And also, we don't have the state-involved child support enforcement system. So that will affect the lack of payment of the child support. So we have to do more on this aspect as well. So I'm curious what else we have to do. So I'm so happy to be involved in this session to talk about what we should do from there in the wake of the new law in 2 weeks, in 2 years, I'm sorry. So thank you very much for listening.
Professor Harada, thank you very much. All right, our final panelist is Dr. Noriko Odagiri. She's a professor of clinical psychology at Tokyo International University, where she teaches clinical psychology within the university's counseling course. She's been an ADR, an alternative dispute resolution mediator for the Hague Child Abduction Convention in Japan since 2014. She participated as well in the International Visitor Leadership Program arranged by the United States Department of State. And she visited Washington, D.C., Florida, and Oregon for research on the legal practice of international child abduction in December 2016. Currently, she provides therapy to divorced or separated parents who have difficulty with children and parent-child relationships, and counsels children experiencing parental disputes. She also provides co-parenting programs after divorce and has created an app for participants in such a program and runs a visitation center with a lawyer here in Tokyo. Please join me in welcoming Professor Noriko Odagiri. While we're waiting on that to come up, we've heard some statistics being given. I'd just like to add to that. We just heard about the issue of children living in poverty, and some estimates put it as many as 1 in 6 children living in poverty in Japan, and it's interpreted that this is directly related to this issue, since it's very common that, as we heard Professor Harada say, that the state doesn't have a mechanism for enforcing collection. So even if they come to an agreement in the divorce, there's a common pattern of usually the mother, not always, but as Professor Harada said, maybe 90% of the cases the mother gets custody and leaves with the children. And so then on the other side, complications are made around payments. There's only a one-time discussion and agreement. So there is a common pattern of the fathers then, in order to avoid having to make payments, they feign or they quit their jobs, so they have no money. When they report their salary, the payment is a one-time decision based on what their pay slip is at that time. So if they show a limited amount of resources, then almost no child support is allotted, and then that's it. It isn't revisited again. So the one estimate has it as that the average allotted amount is 40,000 yen a month, and the actual payment average is 30,000 yen a month. It's difficult. The yen is so weak at the moment, it's difficult to say what that represents in dollars. But when we were at 100 yen for a dollar, that's $400 a month is what the average allotment, and $300 a month is the average actual payment received. So there's clearly a link between these two issues.
Sorry, can I interject?
Please.
So once again, we're confronted with this aspect of Japanese culture that strikes us as odd or contrary to what we are led to believe. Why would a father quit his job to reduce his salary so he doesn't have to pay child support? That happens from time to time, but there's a psychological underpinning there. And I think most fathers would like to be involved and support their children, even if they're non-custodial. But the way the fight is here, it's either winner takes all and loser takes whatever he can. And so there's a clash of these two people, and it's a constant battle. I have the kids, you have the money, give me some money and I'll let you see your kids, maybe. And that happens from time to time, but there's always a control factor here. And dad or the mom who is separated from her children always wants to know from her children, when she does have time or he does have time, how are things going, and what's your mother saying, and what's going on. It becomes a little bit complicated, but the law and the restrictions support people being just very dogmatic. And as a consequence of that, you're not going to see your children, so why the hell should you be paying child support? I don't mind paying child support. I don't even mind paying a little bit more, but give me some access. And the lines are very distinctly drawn here. The new law allows for joint custody when there's mutual agreement. And there is in most cases, there is mutual agreement. They don't even have to go to the court. They don't even have to rely on the law. But in those cases where there is a controversy, yes, it becomes a very tenuous, very legalistic fight, and it just creates more animosity, and the children, in fact, suffer the most. And hearing the voices from the children is almost never allowed unless they have reached the age of maturity and they can express themselves without the interference of mom's voice in their ear or what she coached them before they went to the lawyer's meeting. So it's very complex and it's very destructive, and it probably contributes to the increasing decline of the Japanese population. There are more deaths per year than there are births. So everybody has heard about the demographic changes here. So I think that's an added impulse there.
I think that's a very important point. And Dr. Odagiri, can you hear us even though we
Yes.
can't see you?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should, if you don't mind, although we can't see you, perhaps we could just proceed and hear from you, because I think you have an important message regarding the children.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So at first, so I'm honored to have a presentation today. So I'm talking about the three topics from the viewpoint of a psychologist. One is the divorce and parent-child relationships. Many studies show that the joint custody has a better outcome for the children's well-being than sole custody if there is no domestic violence or child abuse. Interestingly, according to the research, most joint custody parents don't mutually or voluntarily agree to joint custody at the outset. They compromise due to legal negotiation, mediation, or court orders. So now Japan's parliament on last week, May 17th, passed a bill to introduce joint custody for the divorced parents with the children, as they say. We will see how many parents choose joint custody or the family court order joint custody. And very interestingly. And also the research show that when children are raised only by their mothers, fathers have less contact with the children because many mothers are not willing to do visitation. In the case when mothers support visitation, it is going very well. In short, the mothers play the role of gatekeeper for visitation. The second point is introduction of DV assessment tool in Australia. In Japan, in instance of divorce, instance of violence can occur within families experiencing a separation or divorce. However, Japan lacks a standardized method to screen the domestic violence in family courts, private mediation, or child contact service. 児童相談所. And on the other hand, the UK and the US and other advanced countries have the measure for assessing DV. Therefore, my colleague and I have obtained the copyright of DV assessment tool known as DOORS, used in the family court in Australia and conducting trial practice in Japan. So far, so good. So the third point is the voice of the child. How the child goes through a parent divorce and separation. The children's voice are a very important component in separation and the divorce process and must be heard and listened by the well-trained mental health professional or the legal professional, not custodial or the non-custodial parent. It is a key point heard by well-trained mental health and legal professionals. I have received a piece of trainings in the child interview in Australia and Germany. And based on these trainings, I practice interview with the children who are experiencing parenting divorce or separation. I use this technique, the child interview, for the domestic cases and also child abduction cases. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Professor Odagiri. Sorry for our little technical issue there, but we were finally able to see you and hear from you. Thank you. So, hearing from our four panelists, some of the key points to emphasize and bring together is that in the policy of sole custody, it meant that there was a lack of any other infrastructure around making provisions for children post-divorce. So the state has no operation to enforce visitation. The state has no operation to enforce compensation or monthly payments or some kind of agreement between the parents. So even though the law will change in 2 years and introduce the idea, the possibility of joint custody, it remains only that. It's just there as an option. But as we've heard from the panelists, unless there are other steps taken to introduce supportive government measures, then this change in policy will be just superficial and only something that just a surface change. We just heard from Professor Odagiri that there's no mechanism for evaluating and assessing domestic violence. And this is the key area of opposition to allowing joint custody, to allowing visitation. The main source of opposition in Japan to proceeding with joint custody is around concern for victims of domestic violence. Of course, from a perspective of ethics and care, that's a very important aspect to take care of. And by all means, absolutely, women should be protected and have mechanisms in place to know that they will be appropriately protected from unwanted harm. But that can't simply be the de facto thing. So without these other changes, other policies, which are not currently on the table, but without those things, this change in the law won't end up meaning very much. Now, I'd like to also introduce and bring into this that not just the Hague Convention that we heard mentioned from Professor Harada, but Japan is also signatory to the United Nations Rights of the Child 35 years ago. So 35 years ago, Japan signed United Nations Rights of the Child and then ratified it a few years later. And in that, Article 7 says the child has a right to know and be cared for by both parents. Article 8 says a child has a right to preserve their identity, including nationality, name, family, relatives. We haven't mentioned it yet, but in abducting the children, they're also being taken away from not just their parent, but extended family members, cousins, grandparents, uncles, aunts. And in the case of an international marriage, language, identity, and their connection to that side of the family. Article 9 respect that if a child is separated from one or both parents, that they have a right to maintain personal relations and direct contact with both parents on a regular basis, unless it's contrary to the child's best interest. Lastly, one more, Article 18 says to ensure recognition of the principle that both parents have a common responsibility for the upbringing and development of the child. So Japan was a signatory to this United Nations Rights of the Child 35 years ago, and here's where we are today. So I'd like to turn as a question to the panelists. I'd like to address this first to you, Professor Tabuchi. Do you think in the message has come up about listening to the children and the voice of the children? Do you think that part of why that has not been attended to so far is from the concept of children sort of being as a property of the household through the koseki system. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a rather difficult question, but as Dr. Black mentioned, Japanese family systems has a tendency to regard children as property of parents. So maybe it has something to do with traditional koseki registration system. So, but children have their own right to, as you mentioned, to keep in touch with their biological children even after divorce. So it is very important to change the social systems, including other infrastructure to maintain such kind of
Our audience may not be familiar with what is the koseki system. So could you just give a brief explanation of what that is in Japanese society?
Yeah, koseki system is a traditional Japanese registration system in which male householder has right to control all the members of household members. So in traditional Japanese family, male householder had a very strong power over its members, including child and wives. So even today, male have more power compared to wives. So it has has to do with the post-divorce family systems in Japan.
In simple terms, instead of it's thinking of your registration on a national level more on a group level, as a group than individually. The head of household is the top of the koseki, and then the other members of the household are part of that koseki. So as a group unit, and this is part of what it adds to the complication of trying to have joint custody, because the thinking until now has been you can only be on one koseki, you can only be part of one household. How could you have joint custody? How could you separate this? Timothy, what's your sense of this issue?
So the koseki system, it really goes much deeper than that. And the koseki system pervades Japanese culture and law. And it's not just about children or children as kind of property of the household. It also extends to, and you've probably heard this before, he's the eldest son, so he gets a little bit more. So this hierarchy of who's first, who's second, who was brought into the marriage illegitimately through the father's philandering or something, also potentially comes into the koseki. And when the patriarch dies, who is next in line? Who gets the property? Who is supposed to manage the household and take care of the parents and sell whatever assets there? It usually goes to the eldest in the family, and then it comes down in steps. So it's really deep, and I can understand for the Japanese how difficult it is to just extract the children's part of that to accommodate the foreign pressure to do something about these child abductions. So it is a very difficult and tenuous issue, and it goes into the psyche of Japanese as well. So I'm sure all of you who are here today and those who are listening in on the webcam, you've heard of this term of the Japanese inscrutable, and the reason why people for thousands of years or hundreds of years have said the Japanese are inscrutable is because when you know a couple of factors, you can make a leap about something else that should follow that logic. And in many instances, it doesn't. It's kind of opposite. And in this issue that we're talking about, joint custody or sole custody, up until 2 weeks ago, and for the foreseeable future, for the next year, 2 years or so, it is the regime of sole custody. When they interviewed the parents of children who are involved in sole custody, either the one who has custody or the one who doesn't, 80% said, we don't want to have joint custody. We don't want the joint custody law to apply. And that comes as counterintuitive. Why would they do that? This means that for the women, let's say 100% of them, decided that they don't want to have joint custody, they want to have sole custody, it still means that more than 50% of the men also feel that way, or the opposite. So it's really strange about, if you have children, you would like to have access to them, but the sole custody, I guess it works for me, and I'm okay. She's taking care of the kids, and I'll send them some money, and I move on with my life. And it just is somewhat counterintuitive.
But let's bring in Professor Harada on that.
Okay.
Answering to
Okay. So we have been doing with only sole custody policy for many years, and it can be against the children's rights. I agree with that argument, but at the same time, we have to look at another aspect. Maybe EA system, the traditional family system, the patriarchal family system, can be one aspect. But another aspect is gender law. Gender role division in family law very strong in Japan. So man works outside of family for long hours, and mom stay at home or maybe work only a very limited time to take care of the child. So we have been doing doing the family life with such a very strong, very kind of unique from other developed countries. So I think that we have been doing with the mother take care of the child. So we cannot imagine mother lose the custody in society in most of the case. And the law says you can have only sole custody. So maybe that will equal to the mother hold their custody in many of the cases. So nowadays, the couples are doing the joint parenting in the intact marriage. So we see the change in the intact marriage. I think in the future, maybe another generation may take. So people will think that you have been taking care of the kid jointly for many years. So why you separate, and why you separate the child and other parents? In even though you get divorced, but you have been doing the child caring law jointly for many years. But in Japan, father's involvement is not really long-term tradition. So we had to pile up the experience of having the two parents in the children's real lives, not just paying the money, just taking care of the kids is a real life experience. If we see that the type of change in the society, maybe we're going to be more comfortable with the joint custody after divorce. So maybe gender issue is involved as well. That's my understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Harder. Dr. Odagiri, what would you say to this idea about the role of the father, both in perceptions in society, but more importantly, the recognition of the importance of the father in raising children?
Yeah. And I think the one solution is to each municipality and the government provide the parenting program. Parenting program. And if the parents bring the divorce certificate, divorce paper at the city hall, so that the city hall staff give the parenting program to the parent. So I think it is very important for the divorcing parent to understand how impact the child have through the divorce procedure.
Right. I see. So you mean that as part of the divorce process, if you wish to get divorced and you have children, a requirement of that would be to complete a parenting program to guide the parents.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but the parenting program is not mandatory in Japan, but other countries like the US or the Canada and other main country, and the parenting program is mandatory. They have to go through the parenting program. If not, they can't divorce.
Right.
In Japan, we introduced this system, and also the parenting program is is a kind of the one step. If the parents are high conflict, doesn't work. This program doesn't work. So I provide a kind of the parenting program for the high conflict parent. It's a kind of the family therapy, the tailored parenting program. So we need the very fast, very beginner's parenting program after divorce, and then if the parents in the conflict very high, so we provide tailor-made parenting program. So so the parents have to go through this program, this program on behalf of the children. And also we have the program for the children with get involved in parenting parent conflict. So I have to disseminate this program to the public.
Well, I think we're only just touching on the really beginning stages of the complexity of this, but I think we have a microphone, and I think this is a good moment to open things up to questions from the audience.
Thank you. This is Donald Hall. I'm a member of the IAFOR group. The thing that amazes me, and I mentioned this to one of the panelists earlier, is my husband is 62. His mother was Japanese, father Japanese American, but his mother's first marriage, which ended in divorce in the 1950s, she lost all rights to see the children. So that was back in the day when the father was almost always given custody rights. But Professor Harada, you showed that changed tremendously between the 1950s and the 1960s, a sort of total reversal of the patriarchal system, which indicates to me that change is possible. If there was that mindset to totally reverse what had been customary, perhaps there's some hope that now another major change can occur, because we're in a different era where, as was said several times, joint parenting in marriage is so common now. But could someone explain first how that total reversal occurred over the course of just a few years between the 1950s and 60s?
Professor Harden, do you want to answer to that?
Okay. So maybe why this change in 1960s, around 1960s, from father's custody to mother's custody, we had a big change in the tendency. So now most of the case, mother take the custody right now. So it was changed from the patriarchal family system towards maybe more gender-based child caretaking custom. I think so. Maybe we have. I think the mothers could get divorced with the expect of the possibility of having the children even after divorce. Maybe she have some work outside the home, so she can rely on some social security system. So after World War, we have developing the social security system. So before the war, we don't have any. So mother who get divorced and get out of the EA system, family system, she couldn't earn money for the sake of the children. So she had to lose the children. But now, after World War, the society changed and maybe a little bit more comfortable to take care of the children as a single mom. So that changed the attitude of the mom, I think. So maybe that's why I think that divorce increased probably because of the new attitude of the women who have the expectation about having the custody of the child even after divorce. So, but I think Tabuchi Sensei would know more about this family system.
Yeah,
change.
I'd like
Right.
to add another aspect
Yeah.
regarding that rapid urbanization after the 1960s. The majority of Japanese people lost their economic foundation for family inheritance. So no longer Japanese people were not based on family farming. So that may be one of the reasons, why the rapid change occurred at that time.
But it sounds like pretty dramatic social shifts due to the war that was resulting in that change.
If you don't mind me adding too, For those people who remember the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, you will remember hearing the story about kimchi being flown in huge airplanes to satisfy the athletes in Atlanta. And it became something of a boom. You could go to the Korean portion of the athletes' mess hall and eat kimchi and Korean food. And that completely transformed the view of Korean food and of Koreans. And similarly, social change, yes, it's like some glacial halving. It doesn't happen, then all of a sudden it happens. And I think in the 60s, Provost Hall, prior to the 60s, Japanese could not travel overseas. Their passports wouldn't allow them to be traveling overseas, and it was very expensive to do that. And in the 60s, they were preparing for the Olympics, the first time for Japan to host the Olympics, and it was a transformative event. And it also kind of geared things forward so that people could actually travel overseas and view how other people were physically living, how actually life was occurring. And Japan transformed incredibly after the 1964. So the message here is there is hope that we can have transformational change at a societal and legal level. It just takes a lot to do it in this society. But a great question. Thank you.
All right, we'll move along. There's another question there.
Umberto Insaldo here. Thank you to the panelists and to the moderator for such interesting considerations. I would like to understand a little bit better. So there is a very patriarchal family registration system. And then in the past decades, we've had a majority of these children end up with the mom, in custody of the mom. So what happens to the child with respect to that family registration system? Does the child still exist in there? Does the child lose rights or rank? What becomes of that child?
Well, thank you for your question. It's a very important question, I suppose, because after separation or divorce, former wife and child change their family name back into their original one. So that's because, according to Japanese family law, civil law, they have to have a united family name or husband's name. Usually, 90% of marriages after marriage, 90% of the couple take on the family name of the husband. So after divorce, they change. Wife and child change their name, a family name, back into their original one. So maybe that is the reason why there can be some severe conflict between two families, separated families after divorce. So, for example, after divorce, some of the wives and children get remarried, and they make another step family. Okay, after remarry, they tend to change the family name into new husband's family name. So after they remarry, they have less. They are less inclined to get in touch with former husband. Maybe that's one of the reasons why there can be some severe conflict between the child and the ex-husband.
Yeah, I thank you. We're running out of time, so I'll try to take one more question.
Thank you. So this is a really, really interesting topic. I was reading about it in the news just recently, and it's really deepened my understanding of it. So I have a couple of questions related to the policy development side of it. So as the policy was developed, you mentioned foreign pressure was a big part of it, but to what degree did the law try to adopt ideas from foreign joint custody laws? And in addition to that, are there any extra funding made available for it by the government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm very interested in the side of this from the adoption, the translation, the migration of policy, and then how things are mutated. Would anybody like to tackle this question?
Good. If you don't mind. So it's a great question. Foreign pressure frequently comes to bear on changing Japanese policy. How Japan is perceived overseas is a very sensitive issue for policymakers, and also to accommodating what the Japanese perceive as a global standard or as the best of practice standard. I've got to say that Japanese policymakers, the Japanese diet and the policy mechanism is dominated by the Liberal Democratic Party. I'm sure you're familiar with that. This is the political party that has essentially guided Japanese government since the end of the Pacific War, when they reformed the Constitution. And even they opposed the joint custody law, and they fought it. There was a hunger strike in the last Olympics here. It was supposed to happen in 2020, and it happened in 2021, you might remember, because of COVID. And there was a Frenchman who went on a hunger strike at the Olympics because he wanted to bring to light the horrible inequities that he suffered as a parent of 2 kids he hasn't seen for 3 years because his wife has absconded with them. And it began to raise this up, and then ambassadors became involved. Maybe 20 ambassadors visited him while he was on his hunger strike. I visited him every day. He was on a hunger strike for more than 20 days over in Sendagaya, the train station there. 24 hours a day he was there. Yes, policy moves much slower than the environment or society. Policy needs to catch up to society. So I don't think that there is additional funding that has been allocated for this issue. I think the policymakers just tried to calm temperatures down and put together a joint custody law. 2 years, please wait for it to go into effect for 2 years. What are you talking about? But it tells you there's a message in there. So all we can do is contribute panel discussions like this, and your interest too, talking to people about this. Do you still follow sole custody, and do you still acknowledge, parental kidnapping when you're talking in different panels and when you're traveling around the world? But it's a very interesting topic, but thank you very much for the question.